De aquella viene la revolución, para que se asustan será pa' mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando, ¡viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
La bestialidad imperialista. Bestialidad que no tiene una frontera determinada ni pertenece a un país determinado. Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas, como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia. Porque es la naturaleza del imperialismo la que bestializa a los hombres, la que la convierte en fieras sedientas de sangre que están dispuestas a degollar, a asesinar, a destruir hasta la última imagen de un revolucionario, de un partidario de un régimen que haya caído bajo su bota o que luche por su libertad. Y la estatua que recuerda a Lumumba, hoy destruida pero mañana reconstruida, nos recuerda también en la historia trágica de ese mártir de la revolución del mundo, que no se puede confiar en el imperialismo, pero ni tantito así, nada.
Yo, what's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 31, Unmasking Imperialism, Exposing Imperialist Propaganda in Mainstream Media. And today, we're talking about Nicaragua, the Sandinista Revolution, Nicaragua traveling in Nicaragua, Yankees, manos fuera de Nicaragua, pa'l carajo, Yankee go home. And today, we're focusing on Nicaragua, a view from the Latin American and Caribbean diaspora, a revolutionary perspective, a communist, anti-imperialist, socialist, pro-working class, pro-women, pro-campesino, pro-Sandinista, pro-indigenous, pro-Afro-descendant of Nicaragua. So much propaganda in mainstream media. And I'm really honored to be joined by some of my good comrades who I've known for several years now, some time. And we have, starting off with Comrade Libre and Comrade Khalil from the Troika Kollective. Shout out to Troika Kollective. Please make sure to go follow, support Troika. They do really amazing work with the Latin American and Caribbean diaspora. One of my favorite organizations doing amazing work. And Comrade Libre and Comrade Khalil just returned from Nicaragua, where they participated in the Friends of the ATC Rural Workers Association September 2021 Agri-Cultural Brigade. We're going to share some beautiful pictures with you all of that delegation. How's it going, comrades Khalil and Libre? Oops. How's it going, comrades?
All is going well. We're actually still in Nicaragua.
Oh, shit. Okay.
We couldn't get enough of the revolution. And we had to stay a little bit longer just to actually get to know, the country a bit more and be able to build with comrades here in Nicaragua.
That's what's up. That's what's up. I'm good to hear. I'm glad to hear that. How you doing, Comrade Khalil? And Comrade Libre, my fault. Before we go to Comrade Khalil, tell us a little bit, like your origins, your background is Borinquen and going to Nicaragua. Is that correct?
Yeah. So Afro-Boricua, right? Doing a lot of work with Troika Kollective in Miami. And we'll get more into this as the show goes on, right? But I come from a country that's still a colony of the U.S. that was invaded by the U.S. in 1898. So to come to Nicaragua and experience and see and live what sovereignty looks like has been such an overwhelming experience that at times has almost brought me to tears, because also the Nicaraguan people, right, show so much solidarity just in the way that they speak. When I told them I come from Borinquen, they're like, we are fighting for your country to be free too. And so I'm able to see revolution in action, and it's something that I'm fighting for. But to see a country that actually has done it and is in the process of developing that has been such a humbling experience. And sometimes, like living in the empire, you can be disheartened. And so I have a whole nother fire, right, because of my experiences in Nicaragua, to fight and to see an example of what it looks like when we get there, right? Obviously, you'll have like Boricua tendencies, right? It'll be specific to our country. But to see Nicaragua and the way that they've been able to develop and desarrollar, right, to develop for the campesinos and the working class people here has been such a beautiful experience.
That's what's up. And Comrade Khalil, your background is Nika. Tell us about what it's been like going back, returning to your motherland, working with the ATC, and just a brief overview of your experience so far.
It's been lit. It's been super lit. Not only politically, but just life-wise, super lit. So like I tell everybody always, if they're familiar with Nicaragua, I say, I'm Nicaraguan, I'm costeño. My ancestry's from the Caribbean coast, from the Atlantic coast, from the autonomous coast, under the 1990 Constitution and other laws in 2003, and been pushed even further through the Sandinista government. My father was born in La Micamba, ancestors there, and then my mother was born in Waspam. And I got family with Ciuna, Rosita. They grew up in Puerto Cabeza, Bilwi, so forth and so on. I think this experience coming to Nicaragua this time, it's not my first, and it will definitely not be my last. I think in this perspective, I'm making a lot of connections that are life-changing, and it's bringing in a different perspective of dialoguing with my family here, many of who are heroes of the revolution, some who are heroes and martyrs of the revolution, and some who are taking the charge as the next generation. I consider myself as someone with two motherlands, right? Nicaragua, that's where my ancestry's from. But we all know that the United States is a settler colonial nation dominating oppressed nationalities, one of them being the Afro-American nation. So I rock with NCOBRA, the National Coalition for Blacks for Reparation, and the New African Republic. That being said, we stand in solidarity the same way Fred Hampton does in regards to Rainbow Coalition, which is a coalition of working class and oppressed nationalities. It was, as Jalil Motakim says, right? It was Chicanos, New African, Hawaiian, First Nations, whatever, blah, 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 not whatever, but so, and this goes on. You could name them: Lakota, Seminole, Miccosukee, Muskogee, and so on. But also those who betrayed the nationality of an oppressor nation into a nationality of against empire, right? And being a land of Sandino, as you often say, the land of Sandino, where the people of the land fight against empire, but not in a utopian way, but in a very real way, day by day, every day. That's how it goes.
Yeah, most definitely. It's a beautiful experience. And my family's from Honduras, which is also very close to Nicaragua, right in the border. My family's also from the Caribbean coast of Honduras. So culturally and historically, a lot of similarities. But unfortunately, our nation, just like Comrade Libre, is colonized and oppressed by the U.S. imperialists. And we have so much work to be done in terms of food sovereignty, autonomy, building socialism. And it's always very inspiring to meet fellow Latin American and Caribbean people, nations who are lifting themselves up, resisting the empire in such a brave and strong way that I think doesn't get enough attention. Shout out to everybody who's watching and listening, by the way. Shout out to Friends of ATC. Saludos, comrades, Ramiro, Libre, Khalil, Aminta. Aminta's having some connectivity issues, so she's going to be in and out, but no worries. It's all good. And thanks for organizing the show to share about your experiences. I want to make sure that I plug something very important, because the purpose, I think, of this conversation as well, obviously, we're going to get into sharing Comrade Libre and Comrade Khalil's experiences in a moment. But I think what's important is that we want people to actually learn and find out about Nicaragua. So I invite everybody to learn about Nicaragua. There's an upcoming delegation that is coming up later this year, which is November 2nd to 9th in Nicaragua Solidarity Delegation. This is with the Friends of the ATC Coalition, Rural Workers Association. If you want to get to know Nicaragua, experience it, learn about food sovereignty, learn about revolutionary movements and socialism, I suggest this is the organization to do it with. This is such an amazing group. The ATC for me is like a family for me. I'm not even Nica, and every time I go to Nicaragua, I feel like I'm at home with my family and everyone. Oh, thank you.
I was like,
oh, yeah. My first do it. They're like, oh shit, we got something to bond over. People love you.
That's good to hear, man.
Solidarity, baby.
That's beautiful to hear, because Nicaragua is so inspiring to me, and I feel like I have so much to give back to Nicaragua. So I want to share this with our people. I want people to go to Nicaragua, see firsthand. Everyone I meet that has gone to Nicaragua on these delegations, not only do they end up staying longer, but some people actually even move there. They're like, yo, I'm just staying here. And, and so that's the feeling that I got too. And I want everybody to share that, to see socialism in progress. And so I invite everybody to apply to this upcoming delegation, November 2nd through 9th. To apply, just email info.friendsatc@gmail.com. That is info.friendsatc@gmail.com. I also want to make sure you all share, like, and share Troika Kollective as well. Troika Kollective, zero corporate funding, zero nonsense. One of the best revolutionary anti-imperialist groups, actually serving the people. Especially, I have mad respect for Troika as well, because they're organizing in the belly of the beast in Miami, and we know how rough it can be organizing an anti-imperialist Latin American movement in Miami and all parts of the so-called United Snakes of America. So I have mad props. Make sure to like and share Troika Kollective as well, Friends of the ATC. But I just want to put that out there. Please email info. Let me just get that up. That again, info.friendsatc@gmail.com. So what I want to do, comrades, is first, before we get into talking about your recent experience, I want to play a clip. I don't know if you guys heard of this. There's a show called Smallville. It's some shitty mainstream media show. And basically, they put out a hit piece against Nicaragua. I guess one of the producers or something, one of the people in charge of the show, he's from Nicaragua, and he was one of the people, the opposition people, who was jailed and arrested and all that. So I want to play a clip of something that has been making the rounds in mainstream media, and just to show you all some of the media propaganda that's being ramped up against Nicaragua, because it's ongoing. Like, it's not stopping. So I want to play this clip, get your reaction, and then we'll talk about what Nicaragua is really like from your perspective.
My name's KJ Upper. We're here on the set of Riverdale. Over the years, all of us who have been a part of making this show have become a family.
And right now, someone from our family needs your help.
Roberto Aguirre Sacasa is the creator of Riverdale, and nearly 2 months ago, his father was kidnapped in his home country of Nicaragua.
Francisco Aguirre Sacasa has been a tireless crusader for democracy and human rights. And because of this, in the middle of the night, his home was invaded by armed guards acting on the orders of the country's dictator.
Roberto's father and a dozen other activists were kidnapped and arrested. No one knows where they're being held and if they're being given food, water, or medicine.
Which is why we're asking for your help today. Please make your voices heard.
Because the fans are a part of our family too. And we're imploring you to use your voices to put pressure on the global community and rectify this miscarriage of justice.
But not just for Francisco, but for any political leader who's put their lives on the line to make this world a better place.
Please use the hashtag FreeFrancisco and SOS Nicaragua and sign your name on the petition that we've linked below.
Make your voices heard and help right this terrible injustice. Thank you.
We love you, Roberto, and we're here to support you and your family.
We love you, Roberto.
So some horrible liberal propaganda, and it's making the rounds. And I'm seeing this shit being circulated all over mainstream media. No mention of the fact that he's getting money from the same Contra faction that was killing, murdering innocent people, the same NGOs, USAID, imperialists who impose sanctions on Nicaragua. Completely disgusting, man. I mean, just horrible. But maybe we can start off with you, Comrade Khalil, your reaction to this propaganda being put out.
So, Riverdale is like one of those teen drama shows. I've heard it's pretty good, but that has nothing to do with the political spectrum of things, right? First off, I think it's important to note the history of Nicaragua, right? Nicaragua, it was a Spanish colony, right? Up until we celebrated like the independence of Central America about 3 days ago, the 15th, right? where I'm from, the coast, it became a British protectorate for like another 100 years, right? So it was obviously a colony. It was a colony, right? After that, the U.S. became one of the first countries, if not the first, to be dominated under the Monroe Doctrine, right? Which is popularly mainstreamed, understood as being U.S. policy saying that America, Latin America, would be the backyard for U.S. empire, right? And something important we have to know here is that something important about this delegation is Nuestra America Latina. It's our Latin America, right? But not only Latin America, it's our America. It's Nuestra America, right? Because the resistance of original peoples, the First Nation peoples, of Indians and indigenous peoples, and Afro-descendant peoples, African-descendant people of Black resistance transcends the borders that have been put up by the settler state of the United States, right? It enters all the way up to Canada. There's First Nation peoples resisting there and having been resisting for thousands of years, hundreds of years, 500 years, to be exact. That being said, Nicaragua, up until 1979, was under a U.S. appointed dictatorship, right? What is the saying that one of the presidents said, Eisenhower, I believe? He said, Somoza may be a son of a bitch, but he's our son of a bitch, right? They killed the hero Sandino in order to put that the National Guard up and so forth and so on. The 1979 Sandinista Revolution turned that on its head. In 1990, after 10 years of Contra Wars, many of my family who were affected by that being costeños, right? And a main circulated idea, right, is why I always say I'm a costeño, is that the people of the coast were against the Sandinistas. No, it was a civil war. The people on the coast were fighting for the Sandinistas, and some were being used by Contra projects. In Autonomia, Daniel Ortega and Thomas Borges admit they made a mistake in displacing the people of Waspam, where my mother was born. My grandfather was born and ended up being murdered at. Not by the Sandinistas, just due to poverty and people robbing each other, so forth and so on. This civil war, like any civil war, was to liberate the land, to establish a state. In 1990, it called for elections. They immediately lost, and there was 16 years of neoliberal control, right? 16 years of neoliberal control, deforestation, the reintroduction of private healthcare, of private education, right? Things that the Sandinistas universalized for the first time with their literacy campaigns, so forth and so on. A dictatorship, right, according to liberal factions, right, would be someone who isn't elected, someone in which democratic processes don't happen. In the United States, you have an electoral college. As much as I hate Hillary Clinton, she won the popular vote, but she didn't become president. That shows you a kind of dictatorship. We don't hear people talking about that. Another thing, here in Nicaragua, we met with a revolutionary campesino, someone who labored the land, who was kind enough to open up his home to us. His name is Don Jose Antonio Cruz, and his father, Mateo Cruz. 4 generations of Asociación Trabajadores Campesinos, Association of Campesino Workers, Peasant Workers. And he said, here in Nicaragua, there's not a dictatorship. Here in Nicaragua, the people are president. Here in Nicaragua, the workers and peasants decide the future, right? Daniel Ortega just represents is a chosen leader for that movement. And it's something really important. They talk about political prisoners. No place in the world has political prisoners like the U.S., right? We have Matula Shakur, Mumia Bourjama, Leonard Peltier, political prisoners, more political prisoners from the New African movement. Yogi Bear, who is of Nicaraguan descent. We have Chicano political prisoners. We have Borinquen political prisoners. Oscar Lopez is one of the most famous who's been freed recently. We have Jalil Mutukim, the leader and founder of the Jericho Amnesty movement, to bring retribution to our political prisoners and prisoners of war, right? We have to recognize these people as prisoners of war because these people are fighting against an empire occupying their land, keeping them as captives, the same way that their ancestors were held captive, right? And by law in the United States, you can be held as a slave due to the 13th Amendment. So that being said, here in Nicaragua, there's a practice of democracy that's being born out of the practice of oppression, right? If we look at this dialectically, it becomes its opposite. So democracy here is not going to be the same as democracy in China, democracy in the Scandinavian countries who've robbed and pillaged the Americas, Africa, and Asia for centuries, so forth and so on. And me being Nicaraguan, a Nicaraguan born in the U.S., in which we have the largest prison population, in which my community, I grew up in a Haitian community, but also my family grew up in more of a Latinx community, are being constantly incarcerated in prison. Why do you think people in the U.S. who are from the hood, are from the barrio, or from the block, support the Palestinian movement? Because we know what it's like to be stopped and policed. I'm not going to say we have checkpoints day by day, but we do get stopped day by day. So if you want to talk about democracy, you should talk about your own democracy, because you're not doing anybody a favor by calling for war and bombs and intervention.
Yeah, I think that's a great comparison between the so-called democracy of the U.S. and Nicaragua, because there's so much propaganda claiming that Nicaragua is a dictatorship, that if Ortega snaps his fingers, he gets everything he wants, and they have no idea. That's why I tell people, go to Nicaragua, even just learning about the autonomous regions. Like I think, Aminta, you're in Bilwi right now, and like learning about the autonomous regions and how you have Afro-Indigenous communities completely in charge of their nations, of their areas, working in collaboration with the Sandinista Revolution to build autonomy, build infrastructure. So it's something that's very beautiful. Before we go to Compañera Aminta, Comrade Libre, why don't you give us your perspective on the propaganda, media war against Nicaragua and what you've seen now being there?
I mean, what we're seeing right now is a trend, right? Like, I wear this shirt because, like, in Miami, they're doing the same. They're doing the same shit. They're like, oh my God, there's a dictatorship in Cuba. Like, when has there ever been a democratic election in the United States, the United Snakes of America, right? And so we have to critique the belly of the beast, but we also have to keep in mind one thing, right? That the social media outlets, the resources that we have access to, serve a particular purpose, right? And so the propaganda of empire is to call out countries that don't agree and oftentimes have democratically elected governments, right? Afghanistan, right? Before it was invaded by the US, the Socialist Party of Afghanistan won. And then guess what? We started a war on Afghanistan, right? The democratically elected FSLN party, right? You have a direct attack on Nicaragua, and then you have a neoliberal government that did not meet the needs of the people, right? So in the neoliberal time period in Nicaragua, you have a whole working class that was not being supported by the government. But then also you get to juxtapose that, right? So when Daniel Ortega was democratically elected and put back into power, guess what? 98% of Nicaraguans, even if they live in the most desolate, isolated parts of Nicaragua, have electricity. People have homes. People have access to food. People have access to medical attention. And it's not something that if you have money, you get. It is a right. And so to be able to be here and to see, again, like this in action, there's a law in place, right, that creates the space for food sovereignty. We don't have that in the U.S. You got a whole bunch of people dying because they're hungry, right? And so what does it look like trying to critique a democratically elected government when we don't have these same things? And furthermore, right, I come from a colony, so the U.S. actually owns us, right? So who is the U.S. to talk about what democracy is when they don't put it into praxis, right? It gives the illusion that there is a movement towards change without actual, tangible, systematic change. And so, like, we have to address these contradictions, right? If you're going out and you're protesting, right, Black Lives Matter, right, and if you're going out and you're critiquing the U.S. government, but all of a sudden you want to go out into the streets and say, oh, SOS Cuba. No, not SOS Cuba, because the majority of Cubans are not asking for U.S. intervention. Just the gusanos that left that were probably owning people, not probably, they were owning people, right? So, and you have this trend throughout, right? A lot of Nicaraguans will go to Costa Rica or they'll go to the U.S. They'll get funding to start an NGO to create propaganda to say, oh my God, in Nicaragua, there's a dictatorship. Dictatorship for who? right? Because in what we see in Nicaragua is a dictatorship of the proletariat, the working class people. From every span of individuals that we've been able to see, those people have given us concrete reasons and lived experiences on why they support the FSLN party, right? When we're talking about Esteli and Montañita, right? Esteli is a part of Nicaragua that's 4 times revolutionary because they've had to fight so much against this neoliberal tendency that in 2018 they were the first place in Nicaragua to overcome the troncas, right? The neoliberal funded individuals that were forcing people to say whether or not you were affiliated with the FSLM party, and if you were, you would either be killed or you would be stripped naked and be forced to go home naked, right? Because you supported a particular party. And so is that democracy? I don't think so. What is democracy is being able to have an education system that addresses literacy, is being able to have access to healthcare, housing, right? A lot of the campesinos were telling us, right, that they didn't have their titles for their homes. What did the Sandinista government do? They actually created a program to go to each municipality throughout Nicaragua, get everyone's information, and then hand deliver them their title, their deed to their property, so that the individuals that own the property wouldn't be taken advantage of. Does that happen in the U.S.? Right? Does it happen in Borinquen? No, they took land from us, saying that it belonged to corporations because we didn't have a deed, right? So you see these tangible examples, and people have to be a lot more cognizant and a lot more critical of the U.S. government. Again, we have to resolve this contradiction of how are we going to be on the streets fighting against the U.S. government, and then all of a sudden we're going to support them when they talk about countries like Nicaragua, like Cuba, like Venezuela, as if we weren't just fighting against them and how they're treating us, right? If anything, they're treating people in other countries worse than they're treating us. We have to keep these things in mind and address these contradictions and actually be principled scientific socialists that are trying to seek the thread of knowledge and continue in that thread of knowledge and support the countries that have their sovereignty.
I think that's such a great breakdown, Comrade Libre, of applying socialism to Nicaragua, because even within the left, I find so many so-called Marxists or leftists who claim that Nicaragua is not building socialism. They just totally derate it. They say that it's nothing. They say Daniel Ortega is reactionary, all this nonsense. And they have no idea about so many of the amazing programs being carried out in Nicaragua Sandinista. I want to pass it over to one of my good friends, Comrades Aminta, who I had the chance of chilling with in March of this year in Nicaragua. We were out there for the delegation. I wanted to ask you, Aminta, I think you're living in Nicaragua now. What has your experience been like? And tell us a little bit about the social programs, in particular healthcare, because I know that was an issue for you in the U.S.
Certainly. So I moved here, I want to say July 16th, so right before the anniversary of the Sandinista Revolution. So for me, it was incredibly exciting to be able to see my own people be able to be mobilized, to be able to be celebrating a revolution where, you know, we have the saying here, el pueblo es el presidente, and I think that's definitely embodied within Nicaragua, and it's something that I really want a lot of leftists in the United States or in the West in general to fully comprehend, right? Because we understand the impacts of the imperialist warfare that is fundamentally against the sovereignty projects that have been enacted within Nicaragua. I mean, it's been really exciting to be here for so many reasons. Usually before I had ever moved somewhere, I always thought that it was going to take me a year to get settled in for the first time in my life. It's only taken me a month. And, you know, especially as an intern with the Friends of the ATC, I've had the unique and fortifying experience to be able to embark on our historic memory archive project. So that involves me conducting interviews with Sandinistas, young and old, and that is incredibly enlightening because it really demonstrates, especially for the older generations, how the FSLN has been able to enact change, material change, not you know, when we think of change in the United States, reformism that really just comes from this bourgeois ideology that does nothing to actually materially help working class people. But here you will be able to see how many older generations can say, yeah, I used to have to worry about being able to go to school because my family couldn't afford it, but that's something that my children will never have to worry about because education is gratuita, it's free, it's accessible, regardless of whatever class positionality that you have. And further, we also see this with the university, UNAN, the Autonomous University of Managua. I mean, the amount of aprendizajes, of different, titles and degrees that you can establish is something that really fortifies young people and that is able to really enhance the further progression of Sandinista, right? Because Sandinismo as an ideology, we don't just want it to end within the older generation. It's something that young people need to be revitalized and want to be dedicated towards continuing to promote and continuing to call out the contradictions that are established by imperialist actions, imperialist aggression, better said, right? And so, from education, it's been incredible. On a healthcare perspective, I mentioned this on the last talk I was on with you, how I had unfortunately had a pretty crazy fracture on my left foot, thanks to the awful infrastructure in New Orleans, which, is suffering greatly from the most recent hurricane. And that's something, just to quickly mention, mainstream U.S. media has given no attention to what's happening in New Orleans, similarly to what happened in Katrina. And I know from friends on the ground that are continuing to suffer, the fact that trash has not been picked up in weeks is a public health issue on top of the exacerbation from COVID, et cetera, et cetera. And so I cannot imagine, I mentioned all that to say, I cannot imagine what would it be like for me, who is still temporarily disabled, right? I'm still recovering, to have to find a means to get physical therapy in the United States is going to cost me $200 at least, because I didn't have good insurance by any means. I had to pay most of my surgery out of pocket. And so I just can't imagine what it would be like going for evacuation measures to be able to get access to healthcare. I mean, here I have access to physical therapy sessions that are $20, and I get to go 3 times a week. And that's that I haven't gone to a public hospital. I'm going to a private clinic because my uncle is a trauma surgeon and specializes in orthopedic health. It's like for your bones. So that's how I found this clinic. But in spite of all of that, the care that I have gotten has been so reaffirming, and I have really felt well taken care of, that I think that's also heightened from the fact that I'm living in a country that experiences food sovereignty. So the nutrients that I am intaking are also beneficial towards my own recovery, and that really means a lot. So with all that being said, it's been an honor to be able to live here and to be able to really see firsthand. I'm about to complete, I think, that 2 months now living here, and I'm in Bilby now, conducting research and interviews, and hopefully we'll be putting out a short video to Friends of the ATC, where we'll be talking about food sovereignty, we'll be talking about indigenous autonomy here in Bilby. So I'm incredibly excited, and I really hope that more people are mobilized to visit Nicaragua, and not just stay on our Pacific side. I really encourage people to also, if they can, please visit our Atlantic side and talk to people, really understand, what are the successes that have been embarked by the Frente, and also how people are acknowledging certain challenges but facing those head on, because that's what it means to be a scientific socialist. It's that you recognize that yes, this is an ongoing process. We have stepping stones that are essential and crucial for us to analyze, but we are not cowardly about it. We're not going to be like the right wing and ask for US or Western intervention. We're going to find the autonomy and the power and the resilience within ourselves and within our communities to be able to fully take that challenge head on.
Most definitely, and I like how I like how in Aminta's background, it just shows you progress. They're building socialism as we speak in the background with the martillo, and they got the music bumping. So it's cool. Nicaragua is in the process of building socialism. Everywhere I went, people are building shit, constructing shit. It's very optimistic. There's something to look forward to. And I think with so much pessimism on the left in the US, it's very inspiring to go to Nicaragua and see so much progress being made. I want to pass it over to one of my homies, my brother, Yhamir, Colombian activist who runs the YouTube channel Bolivarian Flame. Please subscribe to Bolivarian Flame. The link is in the description. Me and Yhamir had a great time in Nicaragua in March with Aminta. We had a great time with the ATC delegation. We also traveled the same like you, comrades Khalil and Libre, to the countryside, getting to know the region. Comrade Yhamir, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience in Nicaragua?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, peace, comrades. It's good to see you, Ramiro, mi hermana Aminta, my brother, Comrade Libre, and it's good to meet you, Comrade Khalil. It's so dope to see that Comrade Libre won this delegation, because I remember when I met him in Miami, right after I came back from Nicaragua, I was like, bro, you gotta go to Nicaragua. And I actually have my Sandino shirt on. Ooh.
Yo, me too. Hold on.
I almost said. So, yeah, it was amazing to go to Nicaragua for so many different reasons. From when I first started the delegation, I told our group, I was like, I'm about to complete my Troika of Resistance tour, like with the name right here, Troika Kollective. I was like, I've been to Cuba, I've been to Venezuela, and I've been to Nicaragua. And there were just so many different reasons why I was so excited for the trip. I've studied the history of Nicaragua, Sandino, the Sandinistas, but also to know that my father, who was an ex-guerrilla fighter out in Colombia, was going to participate in the Sandinista Revolution. Just like many other Latin American guerrilla fighters, or like people who were exiled from their countries because of dictatorships, just like the Chilenos that had to go live in Cuba because they were exiled due to the Pinochet dictatorship. Fidel sent them to go fight in Nicaragua. And there were many different international delegations that fought in Nicaragua. My father was going to be part of the Simón Bolívar Brigade. And I just love the fact that being in Nicaragua, I saw like the love for the idea of La Patria Grande, which is a Bolivarian idea coming from Simón Bolívar, and which was inspired by Hugo Chavez, this rhetoric. And you see also, like, learning more about Sandino, that Sandino was also big on the unification of Latin America on an anti-imperialist standpoint, which he wrote El Gran Sueño de Bolívar, Bolivariano. And yeah, it was when people go to Nicaragua, I know the comrades here enjoyed Khalil and Libre to see that big monument to Hugo Chavez. Me and Ramiro were going wild with that, and Aminta too. But yeah, like being in Nicaragua, seeing how people have their own, like their project, their big time project is their food sovereignty. Nicaragua being a food sovereign nation, and the fact that 85 to 90%, oh, there's a picture right there. That's a nice picture right there. Over 85 and 90% of the food that's produced in Nicaragua and that Nicas eat comes from their own soil, from the work of their own farmers. While you have other countries, just like where my family comes from, of Colombia, or your country, where your family comes from, Ramiro, Honduras, or where Brother Libres, a Patria of Puerto Rico, a lot of people rely on importations of food. So it emphasized that you cannot have that political sovereignty without that food sovereignty, because the people who control what your population eats, what your people eats, control you and controls your culture and controls your economy and everything. So it was just so inspirational, just for the fact my background, my family comes from a country which is a narco-fascist state backed by the United States, which are puppets to the United States. It's considered what Hugo Chavez said, the Israel of Latin America. And it's the Israel of Latin America because it is a model of so-called democracy. We out here talking about calling out so-called democracies, like, and they want to go against Nicaragua and call Nicaragua a dictatorship and say they have political prisoners. In Colombia, recently there was massive protests, which wasn't covered at all by mainstream media, which you didn't see Joe Biden wanting to do interventions, and there was massive killings by the secret police, ESMAD, which is trained and funded by the United States. But this is a model which they would love to export throughout the continent. And this is why it's important to defend these countries, just like Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, and these other leftist countries, Bolivia, and now Peru, because son la esperanza de nuestro pueblo. They are the hope for a lot of our homelands.
Most definitely. I got mad energy from Comrade Yhamir just saying that. It's beautiful to tie it in, because I think so many times one of the things that, and I'm glad we're having this conversation as a Latin American and Caribbean diaspora, because a lot of times so many people focus on struggles individually within the nations, but so many times throughout history, the liberation movements of our peoples have been united, even going as far back to the Taino people trading in Honduras and Nicaragua and Central America. The Maya traded with the ancient Taino tribes. You have cooperation between the FARC-ELN and the Sandinista Liberation Movement. Shout out to all the real veterans, the guerrilleros out there, by the way, who the actual freedom fighters for our people. You have Sandino meeting with Farabundo Martí in El Salvador and forming the Communist Party of Central America. You have José Carlos Mariátegui in Peru collaborating with Sandino, talking about Nuestra América, José Martí, Simón Bolívar. So there's so many interconnections, and it's cool to be able to have this conversation where we're linking the struggles of our peoples together, past and present, and seeing how an example like Nicaragua is an example of being at the vanguard, like I think compañero Gustavo said in the chat, along with Cuba, along with Venezuela, along with Bolivia, along with now Peru with Castillo. So we have to defend our nations, our sisters and brothers who are resisting empire. I want to turn to Comrade Khalil. I see you wearing this the dope-ass sombrero in this picture. This is from the recent delegation, Agri-Cultural Brigade. Comrade Khalil, why don't you tell us a little bit about your experience? What were you guys doing in this picture? Give us some background on what was going on and how it made you feel to be part of this farming revolution.
Oh, sorry. So, first things first, Nicaraguans are people who lived off the land. It's a rural culture, a campesino culture, a peasant culture, right? We were invited here to learn about agroecology, right? What is agroecology? Agroecology is a method to be applied, which incorporates agroecology as agriculture, as symbiotic with nature as a whole, ecological perspective. It implies cultural and folkloric practices of the land and of the people, but it holds a political line, right? Here in Nicaragua, ATC's political line is held by the Sandinista Revolution. That being said, we learned about agroecology by going to live with campesinos. Like I said, we stayed at the house of Don Mateo and Doña Nili, in which they shared with us their experience. They said, as long as we have corn and beans, we're good. We have an interview from Don Mateo that we will be publishing where he says to be a campesino is to be free. You're not dominated by anybody. And thankfully, we have a government that supports that practice. We have a government that pushes for that. My little cousin, he's like making fun of us. We have a government that supports that, right? He shared with us that something that he could never do and his father was always sad about was that he was never able to go to school. So he made sure his son went to school, even though he had to walk all the way down from the mountains every day to go to school. But thankfully, due to the Sandinista Revolution, they have a school that is designed for campesino children who work, who learn about the land and learn about the revolution, to attend school and get that education that wasn't accessible for hundreds of years, right? Not just before the Sandinistas, hundreds of years before Nicaragua was formed. In this picture, Professor Dioni was teaching us how to bed un cama biointensiva would be a biointensive bed. We dug 30 centimeters deep, 128 centimeters wide, and you can run it as long as you can. We did it about 8 feet. 8 feet. We were there laboring, helping. You can grow root vegetables like yuca, quequisque. Most people know quequisque as malanga. You can grow lettuce and things like that out of it. We were also accompanied by Honduran comrades, other people in the brigade, and a Nicaraguan comrade who works on Nuevo Masculino, new masculinities, right? Less violent, equality of gender, so forth and so on. So the youth there are taking up this initiative for equality of gender. So as we're laboring, we were learning, sharing stories, acts of solidarity, all in part. So the Nicaraguan Revolution was teaching us how to labor and live, right? We worked, we cared for the bed, and then we also learned about deep beds for pigs, like an alternative to the traditional pigsty, pig pen, right? Which is made of concrete, high cost in labor, high cost in water, leads to higher contamination. Worse, a traditional bed for a pig in the U.S. is they stand, eat, and shit. That's all the room they get. Here, they get They get like a lot of room. You get to use dry products that have carbon in it to draw out the poop, and then you can use that in your agricultural products, which you're growing, because it's a natural fertilizer, right? So everything about agroecology runs round and round. It's low cost efficient, and it's based in practice, right? I can go out and talk about this, right? But agroecology is about going to put it in practice, right? Nobody's going to believe you if you could just say. You can know a lot about what agroecology is, but you have to put it into practice, right? So our goal is to go into the urban spaces, which is dominated by anarchist and hippie trends, and push what we learned from agroecology. Because in the US, we don't have food deserts, we have food apartheid, right? Deserts are self-occurring. Apartheid is a systematic thing that restricts and prevents due to barriers and due to one nationality oppressing another nationality. That's what we're kind of doing in that photo. And then here we have a vegan milking a cow, because it just shows you, right? Like, just because you're vegan doesn't mean you have to be prejudiced or rude to anybody else, especially people who know a lot more about food production than yourself.
Most definitely. I wouldn't know a single thing. I'm like a New York City urban rat. I don't know if Yhamir is the same way, but I grew up my whole life. I can ride any subway station till like 3 a.m. But when it comes to farming and outdoor shit, I'm like horrible. And I'm glad you touched on that, Comrade Khalil, because with the pandemic, with COVID-19, with people losing jobs, people forced indoors, there's this renewed push within us in the empire. Like, we want freedom. And that's such a beautiful quote that you said from Don Antonio in La Montanita. I stayed with him as well, and it was just a beautiful experience. I stayed with the same family. Their family was so loving, and the freedom that you have being in the campo, having food sovereignty, being in control of your land and your food is such a beautiful experience. And I think for people in the US who want socialism, who want freedom, who want to reconnect with the earth, like, you literally get charged by, I don't even know how to explain it. I felt like when I was out there farming and being with the people, I felt more connected to like my humanity, to my being as a human. And it was something that's really beautiful. But a Comrade Libre, your experience, this is you milking the cow, your experience, tell us about how you felt at this moment, like getting to do this, and just in general, your overall interactions there.
So excuse the car alarm. So I'll try to speak up.
You know what we can do? We'll go to Aminta first, and then we'll come back to you. All right. Aminta, so I wanted to ask you, touching on farming stuff, and you've been there for a shorter period of time now. What's it been like for you? What are some of the things that, like, for you personally as a human being, that you felt have improved since being in Nicaragua?
Great question, and a really introspective question. I think more than anything, I always think about my political development and what that means for my interpersonal interactions, right? Because I think that to be socialist, be Marxist, it also is formed by our love for people. It's formed because we know that our people deserve better, because we want to stop the continuation of generational traumas that our people have suffered, especially those of us who are impacted by imperialism. And so more than anything, I really feel an extreme and profound gratitude, one, in just being able to have such a sweet and enlightening capacity to be in a community with so many different kinds of people. And further, especially because we do spend a lot of time in El Campo. I myself stayed in the Santa Julia Women's Cooperative, which is in El Crucero, which is like the high mountains of Managua, and to really see, the importance of family, I think, is one of the best things about being in El Campo, right? Because you really just see like what it means to be in community, and it's something that I really want to institute when I do end up talking to people who organize in the United States, because that's something that we really have to work against. How do we work against the alienation that is so inherent under capitalist development? And so being able to experience that is incredibly beautiful. And, further being in spaces where I do see how food is cultivated, the science that goes behind it really makes you more grateful. And that's something that I especially felt during our first delegation in March, is really seeing the amount of labor that goes into food production. I am incredibly far removed from farming, and through this, I think I've picked up a couple things. I can't wait to be back at 100% where I can also begin to farm and I can begin to really actively participate more in Yala, because I think it's so important for us to recognize really the amount of work that goes into food production, and also the ways that we can continue to further advance that. I was just talking to a comrade who was mentioning how we would benefit from establishing oil production in Yala, whether that's coconut oil, whether that's avocado oil. How does that impact, our cuisine? How can we make this sustainable? And so really continuously wanting to look ahead, and not being afraid to want to create new and ultimately revolutionary solutions in all facets of our life, whether that is through agroecology, whether that's through political education, whether that's through, really anything. But so much is possible when people are in power and that they have access and, they're empowered the means of production. And so, I feel incredibly optimistic and I feel incredibly grateful. And, the last thing that I want to add is, being from the diaspora, de-diasporizing myself. Wow, I can't even really fully explain the gratitude that I feel. Being able to be with my people is something that I, could have dreamt of, but to be able to take those initial steps and do it, and to also be doing it under the context of, working and collaborating with so many really revolutionary people that I've learned so much from, and people who I really look up to as role models, is something that for me, as a young person and as a student, that is absolutely priceless. And so I just, more than anything, I just feel gratitude and just incredibly happy to be here.
That's what's up, and we got to have a conversation about that another time. That's an interesting concept, de-diasporizing, returning back to the motherland, returning back to our countries. That's something I've dreamed about and thought about as well. Going back to Comrade Libre, your experience farming, working with animals, and maybe talk a little bit about, you've been involved with food sovereignty work in Borinquen. Maybe give us a sense of how you felt being able to work with livestock and agriculture in Nicaragua, and what lessons you want to take back to Borinquen and also even the U.S.
So there's so many things. I'm gonna start with a quote from Don Mateo, who's a leader in the community. We had the privilege and the honor to stay with Comrade Don Mateo. He comes from a generation, right? And what I started to realize, and the thing that I found very beautiful, right, is Don Mateo comes from he makes up part of 4 generations of Nicaraguans that have been working towards food sovereignty, and also that have been supporting the FSLN government, because the line that they hold aligns with the working class people. And he said, los que trabajan la tierra, nadie nos dominan, right? Those that work the land cannot be conquered, right? No one has dominion over them. And that stuck with me. Why? Because seeing the work that's being done in Borinquen, right? Being a colony of the U.S., what does liberation, what does sovereignty look like? Being on this trip, shout out to Friends of the ATC. Again, if you have not, please follow Friends of the ATC, right? Is that one's relationship to the land is not disconnected from political education and building intergenerational work that makes it sustainable. And so what we learned is popular education, right? I'm a vegan, but that doesn't mean that the work that I do does not support community. I understand that not everyone's vegan. I made a personal choice, right? Like, I understand that in Nicaragua, right, the products that they bring out come from the country. So it's a different connection to livestock. It's a different connection to land that does not exist in the U.S. and that does not exist in Borinquen on a large level where it's systematically applied, right? So like here in this picture, I was learning how to milk a cow, and it's through popular education. Shout out to Paulo Freire, right? That there is a foundation on which there is this respect for wanting to pass down esta vida campesina, right? This farmer life, to make it attractive, because the reason why Nicaragua is able to maintain sovereignty is through food sovereignty. It is in making revolution sexy, and they have been very successful in creating spaces for youth to understand the importance of being a campesino, right? Of being a farmer in a way that is sustainable, that doesn't take away from one's connection to city life. Because there's also this concept of campesina, urbano, urbane, urbana, right? A rural farmer, right? And this relates to all the work that I've been doing, right? In Miami, we helped to build to address the issues of food deserts through building out gardens in the community so that communities have access to food. Why? Because most of the things that people have access to in our communities in Empire are potato chips and things that don't necessarily build one's health. And here, what we see is not only are they building schools and universities en el campo, where farmers live, to make education accessible, but they're also creating it in a way that doesn't take away from being a farmer. So, like Comrade Khalil was sharing, right? Those that live on the farm, they have a different school schedule than those that would live in the city. Why? Because it's a different lifestyle. So they're addressing a particular situation with a universal model, which is scientific socialism, right? And being able to see that is such a beautiful thing. Working with comrades in Borinquen, right? We are in the process of building educational sites that allow individuals to get an understanding of our fight for independence. But also there is a movement, there's an agroecological movement, because there's an Ayala in Borinquen, right? That's helping to build an agrarian movement that is rooted in popular education, that is mimicking what has been done in Venezuela, what is being done in Nicaragua, what is being done in Cuba, Brazil, Argentina, right? Which is what? If we want actual freedom, it does not come at the expense of codependency on empire. It actually comes on dependency on countries that already have sovereignty, that understand that we are working towards independence, right? So when Borinquen becomes free, because we're in the process of that lucha, right? It will be with Nicaragua. It will be with Venezuela. It will be with Cuba, China, North Korea. Why? Yeah. Because these countries understand that our principal struggle is against empire. And what we also have to understand, and something that was brought to my attention that I find very beautiful, right? Nicaraguans are not against people from the U.S. They're against the U.S. government. So there's a particular distinction between working class people and governing bodies, because they don't always align. And so this is a very important point. And so I'm in the process of popular education, right? Not only am I learning what I have learned here in Nicaragua, but I'm learning it to apply it to particular situations in Miami, right? Where we have a popular education school, the Omar Ibn Said School of Popular Education, where we're working with formerly incarcerated folks, but also taking this method and applying it to, okay, our movement towards independence, our movement towards scientific socialism, and applying these things also apply to Borinquen. Obviously, they're particular, but this is the model that has been shown to us through Friends of the ATC, Ayala, and Via Campesina, is that this is a model that has a framework that can be applied to any place, that addresses the particular situations of that place, to move towards one's relationship with land, sovereignty, and actual independence from empire. And that's a beautiful thing. And I think any country that's working towards its own liberation, whether it be Japan, where there is, right, a communist party that is working towards an agrarian movement that addresses the contradictions of Japanese imperialism, right? Or whether it's Borinquen, where we're a colony and we're building out this agrarian movement towards socialism, moving towards communism, right? That there's a very important connection that we have to make, and an understanding that empire's not going to give anything to you. It's a fight, like Fred Hampton said. If you're not willing to fight for it, you don't deserve it, right? Those that want liberation are going to fight for it. We don't live in a utopic society where from one day to the next we move from an imperialist framework automatically to communism. No, it's a process, right? And so when people critique Nicaragua, they're like, oh, they'll try to point out particular things. It's like, but the government's actually addressing these things, right? They're building infrastructure, they're building roads, they're giving people access to electricity. In my country, Borinquen, right? You'll lose electricity 4 times a month, and no one's gonna question it. During Hurricane Irma and Maria, there were people that went over a year without electricity, but you don't see a critique, right, on U.S. imperialism. It's like, oh, these people are poor, like they don't want liberation. They just no. We have to actually create a sustainable thing. And what I've seen here is a possible avenue that we can apply to address these things, to address these systematic issues. And so I'm like eternally grateful. Again, like I've been so inspired by being in Nicaragua that I'm rejuvenated, right? And it's so beautiful to see a country feed into me and to care so much about my people that, again, like I literally have been brought to tears to hear that Nicaraguans are supporting our struggle for independence, and that independence is contingent upon their relationship to us. They want a relationship. They understand the importance of Borinquen having its sovereignty, as well as countries like Haiti that are in processes of revolution. And so I'm just, again, taken back and eternally grateful. And people need to come here because we're not free in empire. And it's something that we're working towards. But to see it in practice will help to address the pessimism that can come from trying to fight against empire and thinking that the best option is Joe Biden, or the best option is to be pacified by the limited options that don't address the systematic issues and contradictions that exist within imperialism.
Beautifully said, Comrade Libre. I couldn't have put it better myself. And even it's funny when you were talking about that, I thought about, in the US, there's this whole conversation about AOC and tax the rich, and we all seen that dress with the tax the rich. I'm like, in Nicaragua, it's not tax the rich, it's seize the means. They're literally nationalizing industry for the people. Recently, they nationalized one of the largest electrical companies to give power to the people, literally and metaphorically. And also, compañera Aminta was mentioning that in the Caribbean coast where she's at right now, they're also building bridges and infrastructure in a region that is long forgotten about. So there's socialist construction going on. Before I pass it on, it's been really dope talking to you, comrades. I want to kind of wrap it up and hear from each of you individually. Before I do that, I just want to make sure people check out info.friendsatc@gmail.com. I have the email up here. There's an upcoming delegation to Nicaragua for the election. There's an election this year. The Contras, the right-wingers, the NGO, the mainstream media, they're already ramping up their attacks. We need people there in solidarity with the Sandinista Revolution, especially young radical Latinos, Black and brown youth in the U.S., especially that, because that I think is so important. So I just want to put that email out there, info.friendsatc@gmail.com. Hit me up. The link is in the description as well. But just kind of wrapping up here, just to give some overview on your thoughts on Nicaragua. Comrade Yhamir, this is a beautiful picture that you took in Nicaragua where you were there in March. This is showing a mural of Comandante Carlos Fonseca, one of the founders of the Frente Sandinista, the image of Nicaragua, of the guerrilla fighters. Just kind of wrapping up here in closing, what's one of the biggest lessons that you learned from Nicaragua related to revolutionary politics and socialism, but maybe just you personally as well?
What did I learn? Yeah, I'm trying to really think. Before I answer, wait, I also want to tell people too about your documentary, Ramiro, Nicaragua Against
thank you,
Empire,
man.
as a stepping stone. You know what I mean? Like to get
I appreciate
the knowledge.
that, bro.
Yeah, they got excited. The kind of Troika Kollective.
They're like, yo. I appreciate that, bro. And
Ramiro,
it was cool helping you. Yhamir helped me out too. And Yhamir has great videos on his channel, Boulevard in Flame, with conversations with Ben Norton. You guys should check that out.
From the gray zone, who lives in Nicaragua.
Zone. Right.
Yeah, so I guess you know, the love, you know, that the Nicaraguan people have, and just how they've been able to preserve their history of resisting empire, because Nicaragua's history of resisting, and especially the United States, goes back to the 1800s, where you had a mercenary from the Confederacy named William Walker who invaded Nicaragua, and the people of Nicaragua and all of Central America were able to push out Walker and his 300 filibuster mercenaries. And then you have Sandino against the Marines, against the U.S. occupation. And then you got Somoza, the Somoza dictatorship, which was U.S. CIA backed, which was overthrown in 1979 by the triumph of the popular Sandinista Revolution. And then you have the return of the Sandinistas in 2007 on the back. Like people, and this is something I was talking to somebody about this. When people think about the pink tide, also people always think about Chavez. People think about Morales. People think about Correa. But something that never gets highlighted is the return of the Sandinistas back into political power. That they're part of that too, and comes into full circle. And even in 2018, with that fake pseudo color revolution style protest that was funded and helped by the right wingers in Costa Rica and the right wingers in El Salvador, using the MS-13 to infiltrate the Nicaragua as so-called protesters, and that got debunked. You know, because there's a saying in Nicaragua: no pudieron ni podrán. You know, no pudieron ni podrán with Nicaragua. It means that they weren't able to, and they're not going to, because the Nicaraguan people are very connected to their roots, to their revolutionary history. And you can see even farming, their food sovereignty can be a metaphor towards that. You know, like I learned something, and I think I'm going to take a quote from the revolutionary Pan-Africanist Marcus Garvey that said, a people without a history is like a tree without roots. They're not going to be able to grow.
Yeah,
people without
well
history
said.
is like a tree without roots. And the Nicaraguan people are so connected to their roots. And it just, like, something that I didn't even mention was just the youth in Nicaragua. The youth in Nicaragua are so revolutionary. The Sandinista youth. From me going to the rural community in Jinotega and seeing young Nicaraguans going to a classroom, I feel like they were either kindergartners or first graders, and me yelling out Sandino vive, and they were like, La lucha sigue, and nobody had to tell them anything, because this is how they're formed from a young age. You know, like, that's something that I also find interesting. Whether they're pro-government or anti-government, they're very connected to Sandino. Like, and they know what Sandino stands for. They know about how Sandino fought against the U.S. Marines. So it shows their connection to that U.S. that anti-imperialism. And also, when I met with the people, with the comrades from Revolution, young Sandinista journalists on social media, shout outs to them. The fact that they created that social media, they told me, in order to counter that propaganda coming from the United States with the CIA trying to buy off the youth. Because that's what the CIA tries to do. They try to, now they're coming with this color revolutionary type where they're trying to, like, buy off our youth with the rhetoric of the left, with the rhetoric of revolution. And revolution is not a moment. Like the Sandinista Revolution, it happened in 1979, but it didn't stop in 1979. It didn't even stop in 1990s when they lost the election to Chamorro. It's an ongoing process that's even happening today, and that you're seeing
young Nicaraguans believing in that project. That's why you hardly see them migrate to the United States compared to other groups, even in Central America. They believe in their project. That's why they stay in their country. Why? Because they have sovereignty and they're connected to their roots. And this is revolution, in my opinion. This project that is about decolonization, and at the root of it is revolutionary and radical love for your people.
Beautifully said, brother Yhamir, Comrade Yhamir. Me and Yhamir used to stay up to like 1, 2 in the morning just talking about politics. I'm sure Comrade Libre and Comrade Khalil, me and Aminta and Yhamir, we would just chill out there talking about socialism, communism, the diaspora. So going to Nicaragua is always a cool experience because you get to, what's interesting is that it's in the center not only of Central America, but of Latin America. So you have people from República Dominicana, Borinquen, Colombia, Venezuela, Paraguay, Mexico, and it's like a meeting place of revolutionaries in Nuestra America, and it's such a beautiful experience to be able to have those conversations and have such a beautiful cross-cultural connection of our people and history, and just really amazing stuff. Wrapping up here, Aminta, we'll do compañera Aminta, then compañero Khalil, then compañero Libre to wrap up. Compañera Aminta, tell us any projects that we should look out for, because you're actually in Nicaragua now, you're living there. What are some of the things that you're working on, and what advice do you have for people who are interested in learning more about Nicaragua?
Yeah, definitely. So like I mentioned, as intern of Friends of the ATC, we're always having new content out on our social media. We're still continuing our Bandlander Solidarity School. And also we have all of our archives that are going to be published on YouTube. Soon those are going to be transcribed and, readily accessible for everybody. And, something that's still in the works, it doesn't have a final publication date as we're still gathering interviews, but we're working on our historic memory archive project. So like I previously mentioned before, this involves, I'm conducting 3-hour interviews with elder Sandinistas, revolutionaries, and they get the opportunity to learn about their entire lives and really have the capacity to understand what were the material conditions like during, the creation of the revolution by 1939, and then, afterwards, like what has revolution meant and how has that been continued amidst, imperialist aggression, amidst a neoliberal period. And now, as we're going to have our elections coming up in November, I also really urge everybody, please be critical when you read things, especially for mainstream media that is already saying that, if Ortega wins, they're not going to look at the election as legitimate. I mean, that's incredibly ridiculous. How are you going to delegitimize an election that when people have not yet had access to vote in? And that too, like you're at that point, you're just very clearly, putting out that you're not really interested in the democratic processes that are enacted here in Nicaragua. I also want to even briefly mention about the elections. I want people to understand that like the Sandinista movement, especially young people, have been incredibly involved in ensuring that there are polling stations everywhere. They will ensure that if you live in the Campo, you have accessibility to go out and vote. And in the United States, they try to have voting polls and dates on times where most working class people don't have the ability to go because they're working. Here, we make sure that they're usually in the weekends, for example, so that people can have accessibility to vote. So as election times are coming up, definitely look out and please be, critical and please distribute our information. And, there's going to be plenty of media and content that is going to be published on Friends of the ATC. So, I always look at that as an incredible and rich resource where we have even prior readings from our past Bandlander Solidarity School. And, those are archives that I use for my own personal research too. And so, with all that being said, the web of, and the ongoing network that we have is always publishing new things. And I think that, Friends ATC is always a great place where you can find all of that information centralized, and you can find some of our friends and allies who are also publishing incredible work. And so Yeah, and then I think finally I want to mention, just as a personal research project that I'm embarking, is studying queer life in Managua. So again, like you see a lot of people on the left, and they want to say that in Nicaragua there's repression, that there's subjugation of women and LGBTQ people. However, I really want to counter that extremely and heavily because, I have been out. I have kind of done a study of the nightlife here to put more professionally, and
For
like you will see
research
queer people.
purposes.
For research purposes, yeah. And like I will tell you, like queer people are here, queer people are enjoying themselves, like, and just not just in that aspect, but just in general, there's a really huge movement that is also being pushed heavily by Sandinista youth, right? And so like that's something that I also really want to emphasize. It's just the critical importance that like marginalized populations play on this ongoing revolutionary process. And all that being said, there's a lot of exciting new things that are coming up, and as soon as those get published, I'll just send it to you from Mira. From Mira, you have a bigger outreach than I do, so everyone else can enjoy it. And yeah, that's most of the research and sources that we're using right now.
That's what's up, compañera Aminta. And I was telling you, I was like, you should start a channel while you're out there because you're gonna get some such amazing content, and we'll be sure to plug it here because the research you're doing. Comrade Big Teal said that research sounds dope. Yeah, I mean, I saw a lot of LGBTQ people in Nicaragua who are Sandinistas. I actually, when we were walking through one of the parks one time, this LGBTQ youth came up to us and was talking about some of the gains for LGBTQ people. And there's contradictions, right? Understandably so, as in any process. But overall, the protections of LGBTQ people in Nicaragua are so much better than in Honduras or Colombia or Chile, where they're literally massacred and oppressed. So it's very beautiful to see. And also shout out to compañero Dionis Melgara de Estelí, 4 veces heroica. Saludos a todos. Patria libre o morir. Dionis, mucho gusto, un placer. Sandino vive, la lucha sigue. Dionis is such a brilliant dude. He can talk to you about Marx and Lenin and communism, but then he'll be like, okay, we got to feed this vegetable to this animal. Like he's just like the definition of a scientific socialist in both the natural world and the social world. So saludos a Dionis, un placer. That's my homie right there. Wrapping up here, Comrade Khalil, any final remarks you want to give to people who are interested in learning about Nicaragua and things to look out for?
So first, Dionis, Professor Torito, y second, Aminta, she's one of the heroes that protected the Venezuela embassy when they tried to do that soft coup auto declaration by Guaidó. A hero, just want to shout out, honored to be on here with you, honored to have met you in person. Just want to highlight that for the folks who don't know that. I'm from the Atlantic coast, and I've driven that road before the pavements were there. There was mud. It would take days and weeks to get from one side of the country to the other side. And the only government who has pushed that are the Sandinistas. And as Carlos Fonseca Terán, one of the lead strategists for the Sandinistas, says, you can't be a Sandinista if you don't accept Daniel, because the party has delegated him as the leader, right? There's people who say, I'm Sandinista, pero no soy Danielita. That would be like saying, I'm Sandinista, pero no soy Fonsecaísta. Like, I'm not Fonseca. They're one and the same. And I had the honor of going with my uncle to go pick up some huesas, some leaders and chiefs of the autonomous zones, of autonomous regions of collective land. And they were sharing like, yo, the Sandinistas are building these roads, connecting us, making security for the people transporting goods who would get robbed, days, people would die, having to go down. So before the bridges were there, we would drive and we would have to go down in the river and go up. And if the water was too high, you would have to leave your car, turn back, or walk your goods to the other side, and there would be military there. But that's not the case anymore. The country's going to be connected, and the country will be stronger for that. They've 90% clean energy. They have the highest input into roads in any country, some of the best roads in Latin America and in the world, and they're doing that project. I want to highlight something from Kwame Nkrumah. The job of a revolution, a socialist revolution, is to manage the contradictions of inputs being put in, right? So you can take input from capitalist projects, but they have to be managed by a socialist government, right? Not just taking money from the Soviets or something like that. At that time, we're taking money from China. It's managing the best kind of development for your nation. It's managing those contradictions. We are not utopians. We are scientifics. Scientifics. You know, Sandinismo is the Chojun song of the Nicaraguan people from the North Korean, the spirit of being in solidarity with all of the world, to not dominate one another and to live independently, consciously, and creatively with one another. Something important about the Sandinista Revolution I would like to know is that the Sandinista Revolution is what it is. Here, there are contradictions, there are problems, right? They're fighting centuries of poverty and things like that, things that are still yet to be resolved. But things have still yet to be resolved in China. Only up until recently has China been able to alleviate 900 million people from poverty, extreme poverty, right? So when we go to these countries, we shouldn't romanticize it. We shouldn't mystify them, right? There's real issues and you're going to have to face that. But the best way to be in solidarity, even before going into another country, if you have the opportunity, beautiful. If you have the chance, the Friends of ATC are here to help you do it. But you should be based off your principles. You should be based in action. And our role within the belly of the beast is to liberate the land, free the land by any means. And so that the oppressed nationalities within North America, right, who the people and the workers within North America, right, of European descent, which no one looks against. They're against empire. We have to fight and resolve the contradiction that is empire. We cannot abandon that. That is the true spirit of internationalism, to put our lives on the line and to be victorious. Last summer, during the George Floyd uprisings, hundreds of people were martyred. Hundreds of people are still political prisoners from that. And we have to fight to get them free. We have to fight so that their lives are not wasted, right? They are heroes and martyrs of the struggle for the liberation of North America, as Jalil Mutakim would say. And I think it's important to note that the Sandinista Revolution is Cristiana, Socialista, y Solidaridad. It's Christian, socialist, and solidarity, baby. And you can't confuse it. You can't go and try to change the will of the people. The will of the people will manifest itself. As Gaddafi said in Libya, who was assassinated by Hillary Clinton in the Obama administration, right? Religion represents the historical reality of the people. And the historical reality of the people represents their lived experience, their lived knowledge. And the Sandinistas are no different. And being from the Atlantic coast, I'll be the first to say it. There are statues in Waspam of Sandino, and the leaders of the Atlantic coast are with Daniel Ortega. The governing bodies, the vice mayors, the Westas. There was no indigenous communal rights until the Sandinistas were there to put it into the Constitution and to enforce it. As one of my cousins said, to be in Nicaragua and not know about politics is to live in another world. So if you're in North America, you're living in La La Land. And as another one of my cousins says, Nicaragua has one of the best constitutions. There's new laws being pushed out to make it more specific, stronger, and better. In Nicaragua, over 50% of the National Assembly is women, right? Talk about equality of gender. And they're trying to make that law, and the liberals are pushing against it, right? Why? Because the Sandinistas believe in political formation, and they formated women to be the protagonist of the revolution, right? And I think that's the most important lesson that we can take back. We have to be the protagonists of our historical epoch, of our motive force in history. We have to be the protagonist in our actions, right? We have to be the protagonist in relation to the masses, because the masses of the people make history. The masses of the people are the revolution. And as Aminta said, in Nicaragua, el pueblo es presidente. The people are president. And we can never forget that here in Nicaragua, Venezuela, or Cuba. And even if you don't have the chance to come, then you have to stay in principled struggle. You have to educate, organize, and formate yourself in a political organization and apply the methodologies learned. And if you do come, whether it's with the Friends of ATC that's there or just as a tourist, right? Because after the 2018 coup, tourism fell by 100%, right? So people have had their lives impacted by these things, and we stand in solidarity with it. In Miami, you can see flyers saying Cuba needs military intervention to prevent genocide, right? Just asking for bombs to be dropped on their mothers, brothers, sisters, and others' houses, right? With no acknowledgement of the suffering that's going to happen to those people. And in Miami, the majority of Latinx folks are working class. The majority of Black folks are working class, right? So we have to uplift these working class trends against a dominating imperial force.
Most definitely, and I want to give a shout out to my comrade Yhamir as well. Shout out to also Comrade Aminta, because Aminta was in the Venezuelan Embassy Defense Collective in DC, put her body on the line to defend the Venezuelan embassy against the fucking escualidos who were outside and who were calling the cops. And so I have mad respect for Aminta because not a lot of people put their body in the lines. Also, respect for my brother Yhamir. He was out, and this is the mural in New York for those of you who are watching. This is a beautiful mural in New York of Juan Pedro Luis Campos, Borinquen freedom fighter, and Ernesto Che Guevara representing the Cuban Revolution. And this is a collective of groups that Brother Yhamir was involved with defending that mural because some gusanos were throwing red paint on it. So they cleaned it up, they're preserving it. So I just wanted to give that shout out because, you know, everybody and the Troika Collective as well. I mean, everybody who's on here just does really beautiful work. And I just have mad props. So just to wrap it up with Comrade Libre, it's been really great talking to y'all. Comrade Libre, your final remarks, any thoughts on Nicaragua as we head out?
Like some of my final thoughts, right? Like, first of all, like, U.S. hands off Nicaragua, right? Yankees, mano fuera de Nicaragua. Why? Because here there is a democratically elected government. Despite what people's personal views and experiences have been, we have to understand that we are supporting a country, a people, a party, and a movement, right? Reflecting on what Comrade Ramiro had shared, right? The beautiful thing about the FSLN party is that it's not a moment, it's a movement. It continues to develop and address the particular situations that are specific to Nicaragua. And this is what a lot of countries lack. Again, being Boricua, right? I'm thinking about people like Filiberto Ojedas Rios that was assassinated by the U.S. government. Why? Because he was fighting using a socialist, a scientific socialist platform and armed struggle, right? Filiberto Ojedas Rios said, right, that we are a country that was invaded. And so it makes sense to protect your country through armed struggle towards liberation. And a lot of people move towards this utopic trend where they think that somehow we can reach revolution, that we can reach sovereignty, right, without armed struggle. And that's just not reality. The reality is that we have to be in principled struggle. We have to hold the political line. We have to move towards food sovereignty, and we also have to be willing to die, right? Patria libre o morir is not, it's not just something that we throw out there. It's not something that's like cool to say every now and then. It's a way of living. It's a way of life. Why? Because people have died already for this struggle. But we also have to understand that people are going to die. People are going to continue to die for this struggle until we address the particular contradictions that have to do with imperialism being the main agitator, right? Like Comrade Khalil was sharing, right? We are protagonists. We have an active role and we have a duty. What Nicaraguans have shared with me that has really stuck with me, right? When we were talking about Borinquen, is they were like, you have a duty to people that have already died. You have a duty to people that have already struggled. You have a duty to your land to continue this fight until you reach independence. And then your obligation does not end. It's a continuous thing that begins to address these contradictions. There's femicide happening in Borinquen in rates that are not matched by whole countries, right? We're a colony, right? Archipelago that is 100 miles by 35 miles, but we have one of the highest femicide rates, right? And when we're thinking about a country like Nicaragua that has began to address gender inequality, right, where they have passed a law, right, a popular law that was voted for by the people that if you rape or if you violate a woman, the consequence is death. That's a particular and a popular opinion that people have held. Why? Because they understand, right, as Mao Zedong said, that women uphold half of the sky, right? They uphold the revolution. There's no movement that happens without movement or without women, right? And so we have to begin to be in a position where we're no longer willing to just read a headline and think it to be truth, right? We have to begin to address these contradictions. And we also, right, if you're not able to come to Nicaragua because that's not everyone's reality, then you have to support the Nicaraguan people from where you are. And Troika Collective, right, we're doing a campaign, right, in collaboration with Comrade Aminta, but we're also right, doing our interviews, right? Because what better position or perspective to get about what has happened in Nicaragua, what's continuing to happen in Nicaragua, than from the mouth of the people that are living here, that are living these experiences, that are fighting in principle struggle towards revolution and building it through popular education to address these main contradictions. And so as I fight for Borinquen Libre, that will happen, right? I also understand that part of that is international solidarity with Nicaragua. It's international solidarity with Cuba and Venezuela, right? We are not a troika of evil countries, of tyranny, as John Bolton would say. We are actually a troika of sovereignty, a model that countries should look towards to move us towards a lived experience that actually does not make rights into luxuries, right? Everyone deserves to have housing, to have land, to have access to food, to have access to water, to have access to information. And these are things that the Sandinista government are doing, right? They're not talking about it in theory. They're applying action to these things to make it their country's reality. And that is a very important thing that we need to continue to highlight. And also, right, just to shout out to my country of Borinquen, we're in the process of addressing these things too. So this idea, right, that countries are not fighting for liberation, or that they're somehow making a conscientious decision, right, to be complacent with empire is a lie, right? We are actually fighting. The thing is, the propaganda is not going to show it. And so, again, we have to continue to do research. We have to continue to build. And there are places that are doing it that we can look to for models and then make it particular to our countries, right? And so we just, we're eternally grateful for this platform. We're grateful to Friends of the ATC, Comrade Ramiro, right, for sharing that documentary that I think people within Nicaragua and all around the countries, from Japan, people from everywhere are talking about this documentary. Why? Because we have the obligation and the duty to share knowledge and to build campaigns that actually move us closer to the truth, right? We don't have access to truth in empire, right? We're fed propaganda that makes us believe a particular thing. What Troika is in the process of doing, we have a campaign right now, elections and U.S. intervention, right? We need to begin to address the contradictions that the U.S. is somehow in a position where it can export democracy to countries when in reality it's using military intervention to create the dynamics to benefit empire. So we need to begin to fight that back with propaganda that is actually from the people, for the people to consume, that feeds life into them, to the point that they have a principled understanding, scientific, socialist, Marxist, Leninist understanding and analysis that the only way that we're going to get free is through food sovereignty, is through armed struggle, is through supporting countries that already have sovereignty, that are not rebuilding, right, democracy, but they're actually building on top of the democracy that they've already formed, for the people, by the people, moving us towards the reality that everyone deserves to live in, right, which is a communist world that socially does not go counter to the working class people.
Wow, beautifully said, Comrade Libre. Everything you all were saying was so politically on point, spiritually on point, and just having this conversation, I feel rejuvenated. Just like how when I go to Nicaragua, I feel energy. I'm re-inspired. I'm re-radicalized. It was really beautiful and amazing speaking with you all. On that note, thank you so much, Comrades Libre, Comrade Khalil, Compañera Aminta, Comrade Yhamir. Please make sure to subscribe and follow Friends of the ATC. And if you want to visit Nicaragua coming up, there's info. Let me just pull it up. info.friendsatc@gmail. Hit me up here or in the chat. We'll get you connected so that you can go to Nicaragua. Also, please make sure follow and support the Troika Collective. They have amazing content on social media. They're having amazing study groups serving the people, both in Nuestra America and in the Belly of the Beast. Please subscribe to the Bolivarian Flame. My brother, my comrade Yhamir, has some great content there, and he has some more coming out. Always a pleasure talking with it. And of course, my compañera Aminta, who is always fun, always has optimistic perspective, because with so many leftists here, at least here in LA, some people are such downers and pessimistic. Aminta's always like optimistic, and she's a good comrade and somebody who I consider like family. So it's always amazing time speaking with you, comrades. La lucha sigue, patria libre o morir. No pudieron ni podrán. Viva Puerto Rico libre. Viva Colombia libre. Viva Honduras libre. Viva Nicaragua Sandinista. Long live Latin American socialism, communism. We're going to go out to a song, Eran 30 con él, a Sandinista song. Peace out, everybody. Have a great weekend.
Le decían bandolero por mirar al sol de frente, quería tanto a su pueblo, no quería ser presidente. Aprendió de la montaña y de su reino animal, que hay que matar la serpiente y su veneno mortal. Y se fue, eran 30 con él. Y se fue, eran 30 con él. Dejar en la casa la milpa es jodido, pero es bueno. Por pensar así a Sandino lo llamaron bandolero. Fue su ejército de niños, mujeres y hombres descalzos. Quería tanto a mi tierra Nicaragua. Y se fue, eran 30 con él. Y se fue, eran 30 con él. Qué linda se ve la compañera haciendo la guardia en el campamento guerrillero. Qué linda se escucha una mazurca bajando los cerros con los clarineros en la madrugada. Qué linda se escucha la Adelita que canta Pedrón con su batallón rumbo a Guaslala. Si Adelita se fuera con otro, la seguiría por tierra y por mar. Si por mar en un buque de guerra, si por tierra en un tren militar. Le decían bandolero por mirar al sol de frente, quería tanto a su pueblo, no quería ser presidente. Aprendió de la montaña y de su